All right, I want to begin tonight in the United States, where there's been a second attempt on the life of presidential candidate, former President, of course, Donald Trump. The suspect, identified now as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Routh, was spotted by a Secret Service agent with an assault rifle in the bushes outside the Trump International Golf Course in Florida.
The Secret Service agent that was on the course did a fantastic job. What they do is they have an agent that jumps one hole ahead of time to where the president was at. And he was able to spot this rifle barrel sticking out of the fence and immediately engage that individual, at which time the individual took off. Now, in the bushes where this guy was is a AK-47 style rifle with a scope, two backpacks which were hung on the fence that had ceramic tile in them, and a GoPro.
Routh was later pulled over by police in another county. He remains tonight in custody, the FBI taking over the investigation. It is, as I said, the second assassination attempt in a matter of months on Donald Trump. Although in this case, the suspect didn't fire any rounds, but that doesn't make it any less serious. For more, let's bring in the host of US Report here on Sky News, National Affairs Editor, of course, at the Daily Telegraph, James Morrow, and our political reporter from Canberra, Cam Redden. Well, welcome to you both. James, you know, the first thing I thought of today, other than it being a terrible day for democracy in the States, was the chaos that would have ensued if this second attempt had been successful. What's your reflections?
Oh, Peter, I mean, of course, that's the first thing I think so many of us have thought of. You know, remember in Butler, PA, that bullet, that would-be assassin's bullet, missed him by this much simply because Donald Trump chose to turn his head at exactly the right moment. You know, that could have had a much different outcome. And then again, in Florida here at the golf course, well, again, an agent saw this guy in the bushes engaged before anything tragic happened. But I've got so many questions about this. Yes, absolutely, you're right. There would be just real, I think, civil implications, I think is the best way to put it, if one of these attempts succeeded, particularly in the case, Peter, where, you know, there are so many questions about how do these people wind up getting so close to the former president. You know, so often we had crooks in Butler, PA. We've got this guy Roush in Florida. I would have thought there would be much more security around the golf course, especially after what happened 9 weeks ago. So, you know, the authorities have it on them to not only protect the president, but be really, really public about the fact that they are doing everything they can. Because otherwise, if, God forbid, a third person tries this and really, God forbid, you know, they're more successful in their attempt, the implications, if people feel like, you know, the president was not protected, I don't want to think about.
I'll come back to you in a moment, James, and talk to you about how this might play out in the last days of the campaign, because I think that's critically important. But it's very relevant to us here in Australia, notwithstanding, obviously, it's a leader of the free world position we're talking about here, Cam. But later on this week, our PM will head to the US for the Quad Leaders Summit in Delaware. Today in the media, and this tells me where international travel and Albanese is playing out with his polling. The Prime Minister was at pains to tell journalists he was only going to be in the States for just 1 day. Now, what's on the agenda with this Quad meeting? Because it's worth noting that 2 out of the 4 people in the room at the summit, well, they are lame duck leaders, aren't they?
Yeah, 1 foot out the door. Fumio Kishida is retiring at the end of the month. Of course, Joe Biden, not the president beyond November. So you do wonder how much will come out of this, Peter. Arguably, some of the most interesting things that may or may not happen will happen on the sidelines of this meeting. A 1-day summit in Delaware, Joe Biden's backyard. He's seen this Quad summit broadly as a bit of a legacy piece. He was part of elevating it, along with Scott Morrison and others, to a leaders' dialogue in 2021. So he sees it as a bit of a legacy piece, perhaps a chance to say a few thank yous and goodbyes to the other leaders. But on the sidelines of that, we're expecting a few more announcements to kick AUKUS a little bit further down the road. The big one to watch, though, Peter, and the Prime Minister was asked explicitly about this today, was whether there'd be any outreach at all during this trip, as quick as it is, to the Donald Trump camp. Now, the PM didn't say yes or no. He just said his itinerary hasn't been finalised. But you think there's no time like the present if that kind of outreach while the Prime Minister is in the US to take place. There might be a few hours spare if someone, maybe not the PM, maybe even least just at diplomacy level, if there was some kind of outreach and engagement there, because they need to prepare. If Donald Trump does win in November, then it would be a very different looking administration. And, even meetings like the Quad, they might continue, but would certainly look very different under a Trump presidency.
And of course, Labor's got lead in its saddlebags with Kevin Rudd and his previous comments about Donald Trump. I think they'd be fine with Kamala Harris, but I think he does have to build some bridges with the Republican side. James, let's go back to the whole issue of how this might change things in the campaign. We saw after Butler, he gave up those big, large-scale rallies and went into rallies, yes, but in contained environments so they could be better security vetting as people walk through. What's going to happen now? Because you would think this was his own golf course. You would also think there'd been an increase in his Secret Service coverage after the last attempt. But clearly, I was reading reports today, it's not at the standard of a sitting president. So he's got to be vulnerable, and it's got to play with how he runs his campaign.
Yeah, but look, I just don't think you can keep him down. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump wants to campaign. The way he wins is by getting in front of people. This was the way he won in 2016. Remember, he spent that whole months and months and months campaign at rallies, at events, in small towns, doing 4, 5, 6 things a day sometimes, while Hillary Clinton, spent most of her time in the Hamptons and in New York and in Hollywood and Beverly Hills doing fundraisers for the elite. And, that's what worked. It flies under the radar, and that's what worked for Trump. And that's what he's going to want to do again this time.
What about turnout, James? What about turnout?
Yeah, I think people will still come out. And I think here's the other thing, too. I think, we forgot about Butler in 2 weeks. The media cycle ended so quickly on that. And I think the media cycle will end very quickly on this. But it will, Peter, galvanize, I think, his supporters, because this plays exactly into his frame. They are trying to come for me. A lot of the commentary I've seen on Twitter has been, they'd kill any Trump supporter. When they say they mean the people who are out there, that section who absolutely hates Donald Trump and seems to be violently inclined towards him.
All right, let's go back to Canberra. Cam, we've got another bad poll for Labor. This is the latest Financial Review Freshwater poll. It has in the poll that a Dutton minority government's now in play. Take us through the detail.
Yeah, you can see Labor's primary vote ticking down there to 30%. You certainly don't want that to have a 2 in front of it. And there are other polls that suggest that they're certainly not massively improving, but perhaps even going backwards on that 32 and a bit % they had in 2022. So, look, that puts us right in the frame for minority either way, Peter. And you start to think with polls like this, what are those minority governments going to look like? Because the maths of it is you need 76 seats for a majority in the House. And this poll would have the coalition looking at around 70, maybe slightly above, Labor about 65. And traditional wisdom would tell you, well, if the coalition's on 70, they've got their nose in front, surely they'll form government. But that's not necessarily the case. When you throw the mix, say, 5, 6 Greens, we don't know where the Teals would go. The other variables of Andrew Wilkie and Rebecca Sharkey and Helen Haines, even Di Lee perhaps, what do they do in that scenario? There's no guarantee that even if the coalition got to 70 or 71, that they'd be able to creep up to 76. You could see this European style, if you like, minority government with a party over here and a party over there, a hodgepodge coming together and pushing a party like Labor, if they came in at, say, around 65, 66, all the way up to 76. I know that's a lot of numbers there, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not just getting your nose in front to get government, that a party like Labor could go underperform. They could go from a long way back and still find a way somehow to pull together a minority government. I'm not saying that would be easy, but it is mathematically possible.
And it would be a constitutional test for a Governor-General if you had both of them, Leader of the Opposition and incumbent Prime Minister, turning up trying to convince them that they have confidence in supply. Thank you, gentlemen.